Doris, an 85-year-old widow, lived alone in a large house. Her caretakers were there to help her keep the property in order. But otherwise, Doris had never felt so lonely. The walls of her home were like silent witnesses to decades of memories. Yellowed photographs lined the walls of old furniture, decorating a life of precious moments with her husband and beloved Henry, who had passed away just 10 years ago. She had shared a lifetime of true love with Henry. They had their ups and downs, but they built a life full of love and laughter. Henry was an unwavering man of faith. He was her optimism, her strength, and the only way Doris survived the tough times. In an act of greed, when Henry died, he took a part of her to the grave, leaving Doris with a constant hole in her heart, never invited. Every morning, Doris began her day sitting in her room in silence, with her eyes closed in prayer. "God, give me strength," Doris whispered. "I feel your hand in mine, but I just wish you were here." These words, a subtext of many biblical health, became the permanent cornerstone of her daily life. Doris adapted to Henry's absence, but in a way she never did. She always found words to believe in and faith to give, for whatever was needed. Doris was a woman known for her involvement in local church activities. Every Sunday there, she awaited hours of gloved shoulders and gentle hands to be twisted. On a cold winter day, as she walked toward the church, Doris saw a homeless man on the sidewalk, huddled in an attempt to shield himself from the freezing wind. His hollow eyes met hers for a brief, painful second, and Doris felt a pang in her stomach. He had a heart as lonely and lost as hers. Doris stopped, then continued walking slowly, her steps echoing in the quiet street. "Good morning," she murmured softly. "Are you hungry?" The man's eyes widened with surprise. As if he hadn't expected anyone to offer him help, he nodded silently. "Wait here," Doris said as she quickly ran home, the cold flowing through her as she entered the warmth of the kitchen. Doris hurried to make a sandwich and a hot tea, tossing them into a brown paper bag and throwing it out the door. Doris took it back to the man. "Here," she handed him the bag. "It's not much, but I hope it helps." The man took the bag, his hands trembling, and Doris saw tears welling up in his eyes. "Thank you," he said repeatedly. I can't tell you how much this means." "You don't need to say anything," Doris replied, a gentle smile on her lips. "I just want you to know that you're not alone. God is with you, and there are people who care." She hesitated, a sudden realization dawning on her. "At the end of the street, that house is mine. I have a caretaker who lives there to maintain the gardens, but if you need a place to rest, I have a guest room. My house is right there. Would you like to come?" The man hesitated, but the kindness in Doris's eyes convinced him. "I'm Robert," he said, slowly rising. "I don't want to be a bother if that's the case." "Not at all, Robert. I'm Doris," she said, and she led him to her home. The walk was painfully silent, but it filled both of them with a sudden understanding. As they entered, they were enveloped by the warmth of the house. "Please have a seat." Doris indicated a chair by the fireplace. "I'll make more tea." While she was in the kitchen preparing tea and cookies, Doris felt a well-known sense of peace. Perhaps Henry was telling her that there was still plenty of goodness and love. It was what she preferred to believe. Sitting together, they had tea and shared stories of their lives. Robert talked about the hard times, mistakes, and losses that had brought him to his current situation. Doris listened attentively, offering words of comfort and hope. "We all make mistakes," she said softly. "What really matters is never losing faith and always believing that you can trust in happy times again." Night came, and for the first time in years, Doris didn't feel alone. There was new life in her home, a renewed purpose in her heart. As she fell asleep, she whispered one last prayer. "Thank you, Henry, for guiding me. I'm sure you're proud of me." She fell asleep without a thought, with a smile on her lips, feeling that Henry was closer than ever. The story of Doris and Robert had barely begun, but she felt at home amid the chaos of life. In the following days, the routine in her house took on a new rhythm. The young man who had only known cold and loneliness now filled the days with conversation and laughter, as he helped the elderly woman with everyday tasks. And Doris found another kind of joy, one she thought she had lost forever. One day, they were sitting together by the fireplace in the living room, organizing some papers, and Doris found a box of old photographs, those that witnessed the most important moments of her life. Deciding to share them with Robert, she called him to join her. "Doris, are these your memories with Henry?" Robert asked as he looked through the photos on the wall. The blurry images of a smiling couple captured during various stages of their life. A young Doris and Henry's wedding, both embracing a dog, on vacation at a lake, and more. Each photo contained a moment of love and happiness. "Yes, Robert, these moments were some of the best of my life," Doris replied as she looked at the photos. Choosing a specific one where Henry embraced Doris, she revealed, "This was my favorite," pointing to the newly discovered story. "It was taken on our 40th anniversary. He always told me that with him by my side. Life was an adventure." Doris's reaction to recalling that day made Robert smile. "You were very happy, weren't you?" he asked her. Doris nodded. "Yes, we were. And that's why I feel blessed to still be able to share that happiness, even if in a different way, with you," Doris confided. "When I met you, Robert, I felt that there was some goodness left in me. Henry always believed we could sow kindness as a legacy." Touched by Doris, Robert admitted, "Actually, I don't have any photos of my past. Life has been a struggle, but these stories, they give me hope. The hope that maybe I too can have a life like that." "Yes, you can, Robert," Doris reassured him as she took his hand and shared her faith. Kindness and faith are contagious. In the following days, Doris began to plan a support group for widows at the church, inspired by Mary's suggestion. The widow wanted to create a space where women could share their sorrows and comfort one another. Robert offered to help, equally inspired by their recently acquired purposes. They started organizing weekly meetings at the church. Doris led with wisdom and empathy, sharing a bit of her struggle with grief and how she had overcome it. Robert helped set up the meeting room and was always there, patient with an encouraging word or a shoulder to cry on. The widows found Doris to be the strongest and most inspiring woman they had ever met, often commenting on how Robert's presence was a living testament to Doris's generous heart. "She took in a stranger and turned his life around," they whispered. "That's how great she is." One evening, soon after one of these meetings, Robert and Doris walked home together. The sky was dark, and the stars shone above them. Doris looked at Robert and smiled. "You know, Robert," she said, "I never thought at this stage in life I would gain a new purpose. You've given me a gift I didn't know I was missing, a reason to get up in the morning and keep going." Robert smiled. He felt part of something very grand. "And you, Doris, have brought clarity back into my life. You showed me that even when everything seems lost, there is hope. And for that, I will always be grateful." They continued walking, closer than they had ever felt. They had formed a new family together and a hope, and they were not afraid of what life had in store for them. The cold night wind swirled around them, but there was a warmth in their hearts that only love and compassion could generate. Thus, the modest house on the outskirts of town became a beacon of light for all who crossed its path, a living reminder that kindness and faith can heal lives and change the world. As Robert continued to talk to himself, the room seemed to shrink around him, as if the weight of his own words was pushing him down. He was caught in a spiral of self-deprecation and despair. The silence of the house was broken only by the muffled sound of wind outside, blowing through the trees, echoing the storm inside Robert. But as the day darkened and the storm slowly began to form, and the first raindrops started to hit the windows, and distant thunder made the house tremble slightly, Robert closed his eyes and tried to block out the storm's noise, but the thunder only heightened the sense of collapse. And then, suddenly, the house phone rang, cutting through his thoughts like a knife. He looked at the phone, hesitating before answering. Hearing the pastor's voice on the other end, Robert nearly broke down. "Hello, Robert. How are you? This is your pastor. I was thinking you might need someone to talk to." The pastor's voice sent a wave of emotion through Robert, and he could barely speak, swallowing his anguish with difficulty. he said, his voice trembling. "I don't know if I can do this, Pastor. I feel lost. I don't see a way out." The pastor spoke gently, but there was a firmness in his voice that Robert found comforting. "I understand how you feel, Robert, but remember, you're not alone. You have a community here that cares about you. And more importantly, God cares about you. Sometimes, the storm that comes into our lives is the only way to clear out everything that's blocking us from seeing clearly. Remember Mark 4 verse 39. And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, 'Peace, be still.' And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm." Robert remained silent for a moment, absorbing the pastor's words. There was a part of him that wanted to believe, that longed to find a sense of peace and meaning. "I really don't know what to do, Pastor. Everything seems so dark." "I know, Robert, but darkness is never permanent. Trust me, I've seen many people come out of very dark places. You've taken a huge step forward just by admitting your feelings. The next step is to keep moving, even when it seems impossible." After hanging up the phone, Robert sat for a long time, watching the rain fall through the kitchen windows. The pastor's words were like a small seed of hope in his heart, even though it seemed fragile and small. He knew this was the beginning of a long journey, but for the first time in a long time, a small spark of determination lit up inside Robert. He didn't know exactly how, but he decided he would take one more step toward the light, one small step at a time. When he woke up the next morning, he could still hear the rain gently falling on the roof. The storm from the previous night had subsided, leaving the air fresh and clean. He felt a little lighter. He looked at the small crucifix on the wall and murmured a silent prayer, something he hadn't done in a long time. "God, if you're really there, show me the way. I don't want to get lost again." Doris noticed the subtle change in him and suggested they do something different that day. "Let's go for a walk, Robert. It will be good for you to get out and breathe some fresh air." He reluctantly agreed, and they went out. They walked through the city, passing small shops and cafes. People watched them with interest, some waving to Doris, others looking at Robert cautiously. They passed by a park where several children were playing while a young woman supervised. He watched them for a moment, letting a slight smile slip at the laughter and innocent joy of the children. Doris noticed his gaze and said softly, "Children are a reminder of what true hope is, Robert. They don't see the world the way we do. They see a future." He nodded, reflecting on her statement. Maybe redemption was indeed a possibility. As they walked, an elderly woman hurried by and dropped her purse. Robert acted on impulse and ran to pick it up, handing it back to the woman. She thanked him with a genuine smile on her face that warmed his heart. That small ray of hope, that small act of kindness was enough. Robert began to realize that redemption wasn't something he had to earn in one big effort, but something he could build by doing small acts of kindness and integrity day by day. When they returned home, Doris smiled at Robert. "See? Small steps. You're making progress, Robert. Keep it up." Robert looked at Doris with a different light in his eyes. "Thank you, Doris. Really, thank you. Thank you for believing in me when I myself seemed unrecognizable." And so, on that day, as the rain began to stop and the sun began to shine, Robert took another step toward the light, starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could find his way back. Robert bowed his head, feeling the constant pressure of Pastor Sean's words. Tears mingled with the warm rain. I don't know if I can do this. The pain is too much, everywhere. I'm really lost." Pastor Sean placed a firm hand on Robert's shoulder and spoke to him in a soft voice, but full of understanding. "I know it is, Robert. Change, the journey on this path, isn't easy, but you're not alone. God is still with you and, well, so are we. You don't have to hide. Let's go to the church and talk with Doris." Robert exchanged brief glances before agreeing with Pastor Sean. Together, they got up from the bench and walked toward the church. Each step felt very heavy for Robert to take alone. As they approached the front door, Doris was on the other side of the portal, with a relieved smile on her face. She rushed to him and hugged him, ignoring the fact that he was soaked. "Oh, Robert, I'm so glad you're okay. It doesn't matter about the money. I just want you to be safe." Robert, surprised by the gesture, was speechless. He had expected anger, indignation, perhaps even contempt, but all he saw in Doris's eyes was love and acceptance.
Imsuri, Duris.
I don't know what I was thinking. I was so confused." Doris cut him off. "I don't care, Robert. It's okay. I'm here now. Let's do this together, step by step." Robert agreed, feeling once again overwhelmed by guilt and shame, but also feeling a new spark of hope igniting inside him. He knew it would be difficult, almost impossible, but for the first time in a long time, he felt that he could do what was right. With Doris by his side and Pastor Sean, he felt that maybe he could finally obtain the redemption he had always longed for. That night, back at Doris's house, Robert made himself a promise. He promised to do his best not to disappoint Doris again. He knew he would falter again sometimes and that he would face the darkest days of his life, but with Doris in his life, he knew he now had something to fight for. He felt like he belonged for the first time in a long while, like he could belong somewhere. He felt like a small family. He and Doris sat at the table, sharing a simple meal cooked by Doris and feeling comfortable with the silence that fell over them. Around them, Pastor Sean sat quietly, this time supporting them in a prayer circle. "Robert," Pastor Sean began, breaking the silence. "Remember, redemption is the journey. It's not about being perfect, but about making progress. And progress is made one step at a time." Robert looked around the room, feeling the warmth of their presence. He nodded. "I understand now. I'll do my best, step by step." And so, Robert started on a new path. The road ahead was uncertain and fraught with difficulties, but he had found new hope in the people around him and a new purpose in the challenges that lay ahead. With Doris's unwavering support and Pastor Sean's guidance, Robert began to rebuild his life, piece by piece, step by step.